Your Honor, I'd like to ask for a recess.
I'd like an answer to the question, Judge.
The court will wait for an answer.
If Lieutenant Kendrick gave an order that Santiago wasn't to be touched, then why did he have to be transferred? Colonel, Lieutenant Kendrick ordered the code red, didn't he? Because that's what you told Lieutenant Kendrick to do.
Object!
And when it went bad, you cut these guys loose!
Your Honor!
You had
Counsel, I'll
Marcus
hold you
inside
in
a phony
contempt.
transport!
Your Honor!
You doctored the law! Colonel Jessup, did you order the code red?
You don't have to answer that question.
I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Well, I want to continue to extend the welcome that's been given to all of you. So glad to be with you. So glad that you're here. We'll get to that in a moment. I just want to take a moment because I just feel that God's called me to do that right now. It's in my spirit. And I just want to say, can we give thanks to our worship teams for leading us in worship? It's just really special. It's really special. And it's not just Jason and Alyssa tonight, but it's every single week in worship. We're really blessed. We're really blessed to have incredible people who don't do it because they want people to see them. They do it because they feel called by God to be able to lead and worship in the way they do. One of my kids had a friend in worship not too long ago, and it was afterwards, and I actually had preached, and so I said, hey, what did you think about worship? And they said, oh, it was great. And I said, well, what was your favorite part? And I was like really hoping that he was going to say, well, the sermon was great. And he said, your worship team is so good. I'm like, anything else? Like anything else you thought was really good? He's like, well, the announcements people's were great, and the movie clips are cool, but other than that, not so much. No. It's really good. My goodness, like it's not the amount of people, it's just the heart behind it. And we're blessed here at Hope to have incredible worship team and incredible worship leaders. And as you heard in Hope 360, Hope Worship, which is, you say, well, what's Hope Worship? It's our worship team who felt called by God to write songs for hope, to be able to give our church songs that would resonate within our community. And so, as you heard in Hope 360, their latest album just came out. It's called Wait on You, and you can find it on all the streaming platforms. You say, oh, you're just saying that because they're going to get some sort of financial cut. Actually, no. And anything that would be done through ad revenue or anything like that, you want to know where that money goes? To missions. Because we don't do this for us. We do it for the glory of God. We don't do this for us. We do this to be a blessing to the world around us because we have a God whose truth gives us freedom. And that's what we're talking about tonight. That video clip that you saw there is from the movie A Few Good Men. If you're keeping track, last week I showed a movie from 1995. This week I'm showing one from about the same time. I'm stuck in the 90s right now. That's like my sweet spot. That's when I was in high school. That was when I was in college. But in that scene there, you have Jack Nicholson who's on the stand. You have Tom Cruise who's trying to get to the bottom of what it is that's going on. And he wants to know what's the truth. He wants to cut back all of the layers. He wants to peel back all of the layers. And he wants to get down to the foundational thing so they can get to a place where they can actually find what it is, what's at the core of everything, what's at the core of what they're disputing, what's at the core of the problem, what's at the core of it all so they can find out the truth. And so Tom Cruise says, I just want the truth. He's like, well, you can't handle it. I think when we think about life, when we think about faith, when we think about the world, when we think about culture, when we think about this life that you and I, that we're living with one another and with the world around us, this whole idea of truth is something that can really it can feel tricky. It doesn't get tricky, it can feel tricky. Because we start to ask the question, well, what is truth? Is there a truth? Is there a foundation that we can point to that was the same yesterday, that will be the same today, that we can rely on for all of the future? Some people will say no, like that all truth is relative. And some people will say, well, it depends on who you ask. Because we live in a world right now, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I think it's really important for all of us to have the ability to discover who we are as human beings. That's important. But when we take that too far, we start to say, well, I don't know. If I'm going to answer what is truth, I'm going to say, well, I can tell you what my truth is. I don't know what your truth is. I don't know what their truth is. But I can tell you what my truth is. But what we see when all of that happens, and we're going to peel back the layers on why that can be a real slippery slope, we understand that when it all becomes about my truth or what I perceive to be as true, we trip up. So this whole question of what is truth is one of the first order questions that we have. For those of you who are new, and we have new people that are coming every week, and so you're like, you say this all the time. We have new people that are coming all the time. This year, 2025, we have a theme across the whole year. 52 questions for the year 2025. So every single week in worship, we're tackling another significant question. In these first weeks, we've hit some of these first order questions. So last week we talked about what's so amazing about grace. This week we're going to talk about what is truth. Is there an absolute truth? Is there a truth that stands at the core of absolutely everything? If I were to ask you what is truth, I think a lot of us, we would say a lot of different things. Or if I were to ask you, where do you go to find truth? A lot of us would point to a lot of different things. In fact, when we think about truth, there's a lot of places that we would go, and we would say that, well, that truth is all based on our opinion. So truth is what I think about it. It's my opinion, what I want it to be. Truth is all about how I look, how I perceive, and we know that perceptions become our reality. So how I perceive the world, how I look at the world, my vantage point and what I think about it shapes the way I understand truth. Or some of us will say, well, no, it's not so much opinion, but truth, it's all subjective. We can think of things as being subjective or objective. Objective is based on some sort of an object. Subjective is based on how I feel about something. So we can say, well, truth is all subjective. It's how you feel. It's the lens that you have that you look at based on who you are, where you've been, what you're doing, what you're interested in. All of the things that define you, all of the things that are important to you help to inform and to define what truth is. Some of us say, well, truth is all relative. Truth is like, it's just kind of like there's no absolute truth. Truth is really, it's all just kind of, it kind of goes with the way that the world goes. So those of us who would say that truth is relative would say what's true today may not be true tomorrow. And what's true tomorrow may not be true a generation from now. I believe because of the advent of these, I think a lot of people right now feel that truth is relative. Because look, I can go and I can discover my truth however I want to discover my truth. When I was in college, I was an English major and I wanted to be a baseball coach, and so I wanted to be an English teacher. I liked English. I really enjoyed it. I also loved journalism. The reason why I loved journalism is because when I was in college, you could watch on ESPN, you could watch SportsCenter from like 7 in the morning until noon. It was just like a half-hour repeat. So I took some classes on journalism because I thought, well, if the whole coaching gig doesn't work out, maybe I'll be a person that's on ESPN Sports. That didn't work out for me so well. I have a face for radio, not for TV. So that didn't work out. But when I was one class short of a minor in journalism. And one of my favorite professors in college, her name was Dr. Mullins. And every time that we would have to write a story, we'd have to report on something, we'd have to go and to interview, she would always tell us sources, 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 sources. What she meant is as you report something, what you're doing is you're reporting what you perceive to be true. So be careful where you find your sources. She would always tell us you need at least 2 sources that can both confirm the same thing, and neither one of those sources can be more than one person removed from the actual event. We live in a world where we have no source information that's thrown out there all the time. Look, if I wanted to, I could write something and I could post it, I could tweet it, I could put it on a reel, I could do anything. And I could say, well, this is Jeremy Johnson's statement of truth. And you want to know what's crazy? Is we actually buy it. We do. And I'm not somebody that says, hey, everything that you ever find on social media or anything you ever find on the internet, it's all wrong. I absolutely don't believe that. But I think when we think about things like this, we have to make sure that we check our sources. And some of us say, well, there is no neutral source. That's why multiple source media is so important. So we don't fall in the ditch of saying that truth is relative or it's based on our experience. See that happening lately? That my experiences or somebody's experiences shape the way that they identify truth? You see why this is such a big issue. You see why this is such an important question for us to talk to. And if we can't talk about it in church, where are we going to talk about it? If we can't discuss it in church, where are we going to discuss it? Or we say that truth is dictated by our culture. As the culture goes, so goes how we define truth. Or we say that truth is based on my desires. Look, this is nothing new. The whole idea of truth is something that's been wrestled with for generations. In the 1600s, there was a philosopher by the name of René Descartes. René Descartes, you may not know him, but you are familiar with him because he is the one that used the term, I think, therefore I am. And so he was a rationalist. He was somebody who was, who his way of perceiving the world is, and his way of defining existence was our ability to think and our ability to reason. And so he said, I think, therefore I am, meaning is my ability to have logic, my ability to formulate thoughts and reasoning. That ability allows me to prove my existence. And at that time, people started to see in a different way their ability to form thought, reason, and inform truth. And there was a huge response to that. And the response to it was called the Cartesian anxiety. And what that meant is what happens if I think, therefore I am, and if I think, therefore I can name what it is to be true. What happens when what I've named to be true, what happens when it shifts? I mean, I think we've all been in those experiences that something that we've really identified as being the one thing in our life, and all of a sudden that thing isn't the thing in our lives any longer, and all of a sudden we're left wondering, well, so what is it that I have to stand on? What happens when the whole basis that informs everything I have thought and reasoned, what happens when that shifts? What happens when it ends up falling apart? But it wasn't just like René Descartes in the 1600s. It goes back even farther than that. There's another philosopher whose name is Epictetus. And Epictetus, he was born just after the time in which Jesus died. Epictetus would be a contemporary, meaning living in the same world that the Apostle Paul lived in. And so we can look at the work of Epictetus, and we can see and we can understand the thought that existed in the time in which Jesus lived. And get this, and see how profound this is. In his work, The Discourses, Epictetus said, if the free person lives as he wishes, meaning, if the free person says, this is what I dictate truth to be, and this is how I'm going to live by it, with no regard for anybody else, then nobody is truly free. My kids, like they're teenagers and they're wonderful, and they are at this time where they are in this place where they are really exercising, I think, therefore I am. And so there's this really healthy, and I think it's really healthy, I think it's really important, I think it's really a good thing for kids to be able to push those boundaries and to be able to discover who they are, and if they're not just robots that are just kind of following everything that we say. And so there are times in which we tell our kids the way that it's going to be. And sometimes when we tell them the way that it's going to be because we love them, they don't wish that it was that way. And they're like, why won't you just let me do what I want to do? Why are you so old-fashioned? Why do you not love us? Why are you so strict? I love being the strict parent. Why are you so strict? It's because I don't want you to run into everybody else. I want to point you to something that isn't subject to your own opinions, your own desires, your own way of perceiving a relative truth, that your own way of doing things. Because when you do that, you become the center of the universe. And when you become the center of the universe, you injure everybody else around you. When we name truth to kind of fit our desires, to fit our will, to fit our frame of thought, to fit our way of thinking, this is the way that it ought to be, this is the way that it should be, this is the way everything should run, this is the way that everybody should think. When we do that based on ourselves, somebody gets hurt. Many people get hurt. Epictetus, then no one is truly free because people's desires, such as sorrow, fear, envy, and pity, enslave them. Besides, even people's moral and rational errors enslave them and others. We need something better. We need a truth that goes beyond what we can name, what we can feel, what we can experience. We need Jesus. And some of you, I think it's fair. And if this has been your experience, I just have to apologize. But some of you say, but if Jesus is truth, there have been people who have told me that, and there are people who tell me that Jesus is truth, and they've used that as a weapon to minimize me, to hurt me, to make me feel less than. If that's your experience, that wasn't Jesus, that was that person, and I'm sorry. Because that's not Jesus, but Jesus reveals to us a truth that we'll see as we peel it back that will ultimately set us free. There's a place in John's gospel. It's in all of the gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the stories of Jesus, where Jesus is put on a trial. And so in John's gospel, he has this encounter with a guy by the name of Pontius Pilate. Now, Pontius Pilate isn't upset with Jesus like the Jewish people were upset with Jesus because Jesus wasn't following the Jewish law. Pontius Pilate was threatened by Jesus because there were crowds of people that were following him. And so when Jesus is on trial, Pontius Pilate, it's in John's gospel, has this interaction with Jesus. And he starts to dig deeper, and Jesus says a statement that you can see, and I love the way in which the movie The Passion of the Christ that illuminates it. You can see it. You can see when Jesus makes this statement. You can see Pontius Pilate. You can see his visceral response to it. Has almost how offended he is by it. Take a look.
Gubernator.
מה דילגתי בלונד על אנשה? יש חת?
ודחו הפלנה, גוברנטור. דיהו משיח אדוננו, מלכה מדבר ליהודיה.
Ezeredi che varei stakallilun minda le Kaisar kod.
Perte istum hook.
Boss,
Ide.
Kant meleke hudaye.
Atimiti psohoktichis adnurogas quia ali siktik serunt tibi de me.
Uomodo eguipsetalem quaestionem proposuissem. Anaecut, num quid ego iudeus, pontificis tui mihi tetradiderunt. Rexes tu?
Regnum meum non est hoc mundo. Si esset, putas ministri mei isto sic tradere mei. Si vicent.
Ant malca, ergo rexes tu.
Ego in hoc natus sum. Ut testimonium veritati per ebeam. Omnes qui veritatem audiunt. Vocem meam audiunt.
Veritas. Quid est veritas?
Jesus says, you say I'm a king. Actually, I was born in the world, and I came into the world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth recognize that what I say is true. Pilate says, well, what does that mean? What's truth? Truth has a name, and his name is Jesus. And that's really good news. Scriptures say that Jesus Christ was the same yesterday as he is today, as he will be forever. Jesus Christ is the one who was sent into the world to live, to be put to death, to die a criminal's death on a cross, and to put to death the things that would bring death to us, and to be raised to new and everlasting life. But Pilate doesn't get it. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't see how that truth could be for him. He says, what is truth? The word for truth, aletheia, is the word in the Greek of the New Testament. It's a word that is used over and over and over again. It's all over, not just that passage, but the Bible reading that you heard just a few minutes ago. You say, well, what is Jesus actually saying? If he is true, if he is truth, if he is the one that when you hear his voice, when you hear what he has to say, that it testifies, it embodies that which is true. What does that actually mean? Here's what Jesus is saying. Here's what this word means. It means that which is true under any circumstance. That which is unchanging. It's a never-changing truth. It's a never-changing word in an ever-changing world. It's that which you can set the course of your life upon that will always lead you to life. It's that which you can set your life upon that will never leave you astray. Does that mean it's always going to be easy? Absolutely not. Does that mean that we're never going to experience hardship and trials and troubles? Absolutely not. But Jesus wants more for us, and he says, you hear my voice, you follow me. That word follow me that he extends to the disciples isn't just for them. It's for you and it's for me. He says, follow me, and I will help to lead you to a truth that's going to set you free. It's that which you set the compass of your life to. What allows you to know in any circumstance what true north actually is. In ancient warfare, and you see it depicted in kind of like Renaissance art, you'll see two sides that were in battle, and on each side they had one person who was carrying the flag that bore their coat of arms. And in battle, in this kind of ancient battle, hand-to-hand battle, what was understood by both sides is you did not bring a hand against the flag bearer. Why? Because in that kind of combat, when it was literally you would go to the other side and you would take care of everybody that was in front of you. In the midst of the battle, oftentimes people would get turned around, they'd get twisted around, they would become disoriented. And so in the middle of battle, when they became disoriented, they would look to the sky and they would look to their flag that would allow them to regain their direction, to know which way they were supposed to go. That's Jesus. Because life has a way of mixing and turning us around, and sometimes we get disoriented and we start to wonder which way we're supposed to go, and we look to Jesus, who is the truth. This is what Jesus says in the Bible reading that you heard just a few minutes ago. So Jesus said to the people who believed in him, you are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teaching. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That this truth is, it's not like Jesus is angry or God is angry. He says, I'm gonna say a whole bunch of things. I'm gonna have a whole bunch of things that are just gonna make people feel awful about themselves. I'm going to have a truth that's going to divide people. Jesus doesn't divide people. People divide people. Jesus says, no, I have a better way. It's in John chapter 14. Jesus says, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. If you want to find it, follow me. The truth that we have, that we discover in his word, it doesn't injure us. It heals us. Ultimately, it gives us freedom. Like, look, the law that God has wasn't given to us to restrain us. Literally, God's law was given as boundaries to create a space where our lives could flourish. Think about it when our kids were little. When our kids were little, like Bridget and I were like, we're never gonna get a fence. It's a waste of money. We don't want to have a fence. And then when our kids were little, we realized that if we don't put a fence, they're gonna be halfway down the block because our kids are runners. That's just who they are. And if they run from our yard, then they might get into a place where they don't know what's safe or not. So what do? We put a fence in our yard. It created a barrier that kept them safe, so that they could go and they could play and they could enjoy everything that they could enjoy, so that they could ultimately be free in a way that wouldn't injure them, except for when they fought, but wouldn't injure them or injure others around them. That's what God's truth does for us. But here's the challenge in this. Is sometimes we hear, well, the truth is for freedom, and so it's my job, it's my duty to make sure I tell everybody when they aren't living according to God's truth. And it's my job to scream at them and yell at them and do all of those things. That's not what God's word says. Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, he says, when you share the truth, it only can be shared if it's done in love. And I have to kindly remind you, if you're talking about Jesus and you don't sound like Jesus, please stop. It's not doing anybody any good, and it's definitely not making the kingdom more crowded. Because it seems in the world in which we live, we have a whole lot of people, and if I'm going to be honest, myself included at times. We do a really good job of talking about all the things that God wants and all the things that Jesus wants and all the ways that he's told us to live, but we say it in a way that's more condemning than life-giving. Paul says to the church in Ephesus that was tripping all over themselves. He said, instead, we speak the truth in love. We do it relationally. If I yell and scream at somebody to do what I want them to do, at best they'll do it, but they'll only do it out of reluctant compliance, for fear that I will continue to yell at them. But when I'm not around, do you think they'll do it? Absolutely not. They'll probably do the opposite thing, because they'll say, God, that guy was a jerk. But if I love them, if they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm for them, that I want what's best for them, that I'm not getting anything out of it, that it's done in a sincere way, whew. When people have done that to me, I've actually listened. I'll never forget a conversation I had with my dad when I was 14, 15 years old. When I told him he didn't love me because he wouldn't give things to me. And he said to me, Jeremy, you're the only one of you that I'll ever have. I don't get a do-over as a parent. And I love you so much. I love you so much that you have to allow me to make this call for you. I love you that much. Look, I'd asked him about 52,000 times if I could do what I wanted to do. And he had every right in that moment to yell and scream at me and say, do not ask me that one more time, or else. But rather, he loved me. And he gave me life, because that's what truth does. Truth doesn't just give us freedom, truth gives us life. Every single word of this is given to us to give us life, to point us to life. Not to take life, but to give it. It's in the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus' longest recorded sermon in the Gospels. It's Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. It starts with the Beatitudes. And it goes from the Beatitudes, and then Jesus kind of outlines what his kingdom is going to look like. And he tackles some really tough topics. He really does. You should read it. It's wonderful. And what's really cool and what's really powerful is that so much of the ways in which we interact with one another 2,000 years later is based on the words that Jesus gave and he spoke in the Sermon on the Mount. It's amazing. But Jesus says at the end of that, he says, okay, now you've heard it, now go do it. Let these truths that I've shared with you, let these things be the foundation upon which you build your life on. So much so that if anybody hears these words, listens to my teaching, and follows it, is wise, like a person who builds a house that's on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise, though the battles of life have a way of turning us around, you'll still be able to see me. You'll still know which way I'm going and how to follow. Your house won't collapse because it's built on the bedrock. These are words to build a life on. Not just the words in the Sermon on the Mount, but on every word that God gives us, his living truth. There was a person who was a president. This was probably about 15, 16 years ago, maybe even longer. And I apologize because I cannot remember his name. And I've searched for it the last 5 days. So much so, my fingers are getting sore. I've been typing it on my phone so many times. But he was a guy, and he was the president of the Atheists for Christ. Now that sounds crazy. Atheists are people who don't believe in God. But he was the head of an organization called the Atheists for Christ. And he was quoted as saying, what we're seeing currently is a generation of people who do not follow the way of Jesus any longer. And if we continue to do it, our society is going to collapse. Look, he doesn't believe in God, but he believes that the words that Jesus shared, he believes he's just a human being, but he believes that the words that he shared, the truth that he had, are worthy to follow, even if he didn't follow God. And it's true for us. In our everyday life, how we live, how we interact with the people around us, how we perceive the current events of our day, when we start to wonder what is truth, here's the thing. Here's my encouragement. Here's what the Bible has to say. Look to Jesus. Look to him. I mean, I know it was cliche a generation or so ago, but there was a whole lot of people who wore bracelets that said WWJD on them. And it was a reminder that wherever they found themselves in a situation that they didn't know how to interact or didn't know how to react, they would ask themselves the question, what would Jesus do? And I think we need to go back to that. I think there's something about that sometimes it's easy in our opinions of people who don't think like us, who don't act like us, who don't believe like us. It becomes very hard for us to do that. And in those moments, we want to distance ourselves from the truth, and we want to take our opinions to them and make sure that we verbally or on the internet, we want to destroy him. I don't believe Jesus does that. So yeah, but if somebody's not living according to the truth, they need to know about it. Now here's what Jesus says in John chapter 1. Jesus says, John says at the beginning of his gospel, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, who's full of grace and truth. You can't have truth without grace, and you can't have grace without truth. And Jesus embodies fully both of them. One of the things that I love about what it means to follow Jesus is we're somebody who takes his word extraordinarily seriously. And because we take his word extraordinarily seriously, we take the promise of his grace extraordinarily seriously. And we can't have a high view of grace if we don't have a high view of his word. And we can't have a high view of his word unless we have a high view of his grace. That grace and truth are companions with one another. And those things are things that set us free, not just free in our day-to-day, but set us free from the things in life that we don't have the ability to overcome on our own. The Bible reading that you heard, the very end of it, it's in John chapter 8. It says, I tell you the truth, Jesus says, everyone who sins is a slave of sin. And that's everybody, all of us. All of us are victims, are culprits of that. Everyone who sins is a slave to sin. And when you're a slave, you're not a permanent member of the family, but the Son is. And so if the Son, Jesus Christ, sets you free, you're truly free. Truth gives freedom, truth gives life, truth gives love, and truth sets us free from the realities of sin and death. Why is truth such an important thing? Why is truth something that is a first order primary question? Because our opinions, our desires, our subjective truths can't free us from the things that we don't have the power over. We need to major in the major and minor in the minors. Because the truth that God has for us doesn't point us to our wants, to our desires, to our opinions. It points us to the cross where Jesus Christ gained a victory for you and for me. That we would be able to know that beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's nothing in all of creation that could ever separate us from the love of God that's revealed to us in Christ Jesus our Lord, who allows us to know that no matter how it's going today, we're going to be okay because He is with us. And so in those moments, we get to wait on Him. We get to wait on His love. We get to wait on His truth. We get to wait on His presence. We get to wait on the one who's knocking on the doors of our hearts and is waiting for us to let Him in. We wait on Him because He's good. We wait on Him because He's come and He's promised that He will come again. And when He comes again, everything is going to be set back together exactly the way that it was supposed to be. If you want to know truth, look to Jesus. If you want to encounter Jesus, read His Word. And see how it sets you free, both in your day-to-day life, but most importantly, for eternity. So as we close, we're going to stand, we're going to sing. And we're going to sing this song that was written by hope, for hope. We're going to declare this truth, and then we'll go home. Amen? Amen.